My name is Michael, and this is my Atheist Testimony. Romans 3:10 through 12. All have turned away. They have together become worthless. There is none who does good, not even one. Starting in about 6th grade, I tuned into these messages directly from the Bible very clearly. I was an emotional wreck looking for answers, and the Bible told me I was a sinner worthy of hell. I had my answer. But good news.
Guess who's here to save the day?
Jesus is here to save the day. The message of "you're bad" is easy for a kid to understand. The message of a Trinitarian God sending himself, sacrificing himself to save us from himself, does not. One of these messages I got loud and clear. The other one still doesn't make much sense.
It doesn't make any sense.
Any child, like me, would take something like this to heart, coming from a parent or any person we were taught to trust, like a pastor. Of course, all those other believers who were told to help keep us in line. Unfortunately, none of the adults in my life were healthy enough to realize how harmful these messages were, and many still aren't. I knew the part about Jesus forgiving me, but I also knew that I kept choosing to sin over and over and over again, and there was nothing that I could do to stop myself. I would always beat myself up, pile on the guilt and shame for taking advantage of Jesus' sacrifice. I was reminded that I was continually spitting in his face, nailing him to the cross, but that he loved me, even though I was so bad, so bad. I didn't have a healthy home life either. I felt like I was constantly letting down or angering my earthly and heavenly fathers simultaneously.
Everyone has an angry dad.
Why is God angry?
That's how God is.
Later, much later, unfortunately, I would find out that both of them had failed me. Both unable or unwilling to provide the love, safety, and support that every child needs. By 6th grade, I fully hated myself. I was guilty of sin and deserving of the eternal penalty of burning in hell for my few and finite mistakes. Be it not for the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, who I owed my life and allegiance to for this gift.
Thanks for nothing.
I received the message loud and clear. Like every other human, I was a broken boy, unable to do good without the help of God. I heard this message repeatedly, all while growing up in an unhealthy family built on generations of religious, emotional, and sexual trauma. I didn't know much, but I knew I needed saving. Nobody needed to tell me anymore. I bought it, hook, line, and sinker. So I cried for God's help and healing all along the way, day in and day out. Sadly, the Bible did little more than reinforce my negative self-beliefs and had me constantly begging for help from on high. And if you've ever been a Christian or still are one, you know that the moments where you know God is doing something are very few and far between. And I would add that they were very unclear.
God, is that true? God?
As I was told repeatedly, sometimes God answers no or not yet. But how the hell are you supposed to know? Sometimes my prayers would line up with good things that happened to me, and I would give God the credit and be grateful. But inside, I was still stuck hating myself. I couldn't even feel good about myself when positive things happened to me because I knew I couldn't have done it without the help of God.
The Bible tells me so.
God got all the credit. I got all the blame. You see, the gospel is often presented as a message of hope and freedom. But before that message is even possible, humans, especially children, have to be told and forced to accept, that they are horrible sinners and worthy of hell.
Save yourself from hell by making Jesus your Lord!
And when you're raised in the church, you're told this from a very young age, repeatedly, making it impossible to know your own self-worth. Out of all the lessons in the Bible, the message of human brokenness and our need for saving is pervasive. With all of the questions that I had and couldn't talk about, the one thing the Bible made clear without a doubt was that I was born deserving of punishment. I would cry out to God for strength day in and day out. I felt so weak because I was told that I was weak and I believed it. Why wouldn't I? I learned from the Bible very early on that I couldn't overcome things by myself. Paul constantly reminded me of this in Romans when he said, I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. For I know that good itself does not dwell in me. That is in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do. This I keep on doing. What a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death? What a beautiful and empowering message to send children. I felt incapable of doing anything, and I wallowed in a deep, dark depression, parents too broken to notice or do anything to help. Finally, in high school, one of my friend's moms told my mom she was concerned about my mental health. I'd been deeply depressed for 3 years by that point. When I asked my mom about this recently, she remembered sensing that something was wrong, but because of her own trauma, she didn't have the words or the skills to help herself, much less me. Since then, I spent a lot of years processing how my parents' own childhoods were responsible for their inability to raise healthy children. I make excuses for them all the time. It's hard to place blame on people who had extremely difficult childhoods themselves. But as I've now learned through counseling, it's important to see that we were not given what we needed as children in order to feel safe and loved. I don't hold it against my mom. I am and will forever be grateful to my mother who fought for her own mental health during this time and later helped me on my own journey. I was never able to talk with my dad about any of this stuff. Unfortunately, he was never able to formally work on himself. He couldn't bring himself to go get professional help. It wasn't until he had spinal meningitis in 2010, when I was 28, that he took time to focus on building better relationships. He still chose not to seek professional help. After that, he would grow to some extent in his relationships with my brothers and I, but he was never able to have a truly healthy relationship with my mom. And unfortunately, his religion played a large role in this. His faith gave him a false sense of being healthy, or redeemed, as he liked to put it. The Bible says we are made new again when we accept Christ as our Lord and Savior. Unfortunately, he, like other Christians, believed that accepting Jesus into his heart caused some sort of actual change or healing in him, giving him the out he needed to not work on himself. When you can pretend you're fixed, you don't actually have to fix yourself. Sadly, too many Christians claim being forgiven or redeemed and forget that true healing still needs to occur. The work has to be done. If you're living your life based on the Bible, but don't include any input from a psychologist or at the very least a trained counselor that's not a pastor, then you likely haven't actually fixed any of your problems. My dad swept his problems under the Jesus rug and hoped that nobody noticed how broken he actually was.
No problemo. We'll just sweep it all under the rug.
To be fair, my dad had no chance of a healthy childhood. When he was a baby, his mom left his biological father and went back to live with her parents. Then her parents forced her to go back to school and sent my dad to live with his aunt. If you know anything about psychology, this was that time in life where he should have been building a healthy attachment to his mom.
Intense attachments.
But she wasn't even there. Later, she remarried a man whom she had 2 more sons with. He adopted my dad. Unfortunately, he wasn't the healthiest person either. He actually beat up my dad in high school over a simple misunderstanding. And they eventually went their separate ways, with both of my dad's half-brothers going with their dad, leaving my dad alone to support his mom. After a total of 4 failed marriages, my dad became her surrogate husband. She would leave him alone and go out dancing, once even not coming home until the next day. He was expected to be a man from a very young age, which would explain why he had very little knowledge of how to give grace to 3 young rowdy boys. He wanted us to be little considerate adults, and that's just not what you're going to get with 3 brothers. My mom's background was immeasurably worse. She was abused by a mentally unhealthy father who came from an even more mentally unhealthy mother of his own, who came from a lineage of Mormon sexual trauma.
I'm Elder Young, and this is Elder White.
Well, you 2 boys can just fuck right off.
One male relative had 6 wives and 36 children in all. And our religious heritage trauma extends all the way back to relatives who literally lived in the same town as Joseph Smith, and another one who worked in Brigham Young's personal flour mill. Enthralling, I know. My dad started going to church to give my mom, and once they got married, stopped going until much later when he thought he might be losing control of his wife. At which point he went back to keep an eye on her. He ended up subscribing to the prosperity gospel and built relationships with other Christian businessmen.
And once again, tithing is 10% off the top.
But relationships in a Christian community are not necessarily authentic or healthy, and one of his longtime pastors was the best example of that. After years of earning a good reputation in the church and becoming fishing buddies with his pastor, my dad was made an elder. His BFF pastor did not do his due diligence when it came to vetting. My dad considered his pastor his best friend, but to this day, I honestly don't know if he even knew my dad, much less cared about him. If he knew anything about my dad, he'd have to explain why he allowed him into church leadership.
That's elder abuse.
Or it's possible that our pastor simply didn't know anything about mental health and therefore had no idea how to spot or help someone with mental health issues, because he likely only knew what the Bible said about it, which is nothing. There are requirements for being an elder in the church. One of them is having your house in order, and another one is having a healthy biblical marriage, whatever that is. My dad did not have his household in order until we were out of it, and even then, he still couldn't work on himself or take any responsibility for his role in my parents' broken marriage. So his pastor helped keep him from having to actually grow, while his need to be liked was fed constantly by our church community. To be fair, we were all playing the same hide the truth game. So while it seemed like my dad had everything together to the outside world, he still hadn't learned how to love his wife and had no idea how to raise 3 boys. His tools were anger, volume, and the occasional physicality. This reinforced the message I was receiving loud and clear from the Bible as well. I was broken. Something was definitely wrong with me. I wasn't worth anybody's love or grace, just as I was.
It's all on Michael. He's to blame.
I had to be better. So I tried to live up to all of the expectations put on me by my earthly and heavenly fathers, but everything I did wasn't good enough. God apparently wasn't able to speak my love language, and my father wasn't much better, except on vacations. He was better on vacations. When I reached the age of reason, which comes later for those of us brought up in the church and private Christian schools, I had a lot of questions about my faith, but I always looked for the answers. Well, the answers that I wanted to find. I forgot how to look up the other perspectives and just found the info I needed to bolster what I already believed. Sadly, I was never taught to value my own thoughts, so I filled my head with what Christian apologists and pastors told me this 2,000-year-old book said about me. And that's literally how I defined myself. The Bible tells you who you are, and you don't question it. I was a sinner. The other stuff in there about how to undo that was very confusing, but everyone seemed to be very sure that we all deserve to burn in hell. I constantly read books about the Bible to help me become that strong Christian man in hopes of seeing God do something in my life, bring me a hot wife, and give me some sort of direction or hope, or at least a break from it all. I read Case for Christ, Case for Faith, Evidence Demands a Verdict, Letters from a Skeptic, every freaking C.S. Lewis book, and on and on and on. I put every ounce of energy I had into trying to connect with God because I was told that He was the only way out of my deep, dark pain. The only way out. So why was I still stuck?
That's a fair question.
I needed some sort of tangible help from a real, active, living and loving God that I was told existed. And yet somehow He only showed up in other people's lives. People with sketchy stories about how God did something amazing in their life and they knew that it was Him. None of us had ever actually personally experienced anything impressive, but we heard stories on TV and read about them in books. And here's the shocker. This made me dislike myself even more. What was it that I was doing wrong? It clearly had to be my fault because I was told that it couldn't be God's fault. He doesn't do anything wrong. I went to church, youth group, and every event I could to try to bolster my faith. I surrounded myself with worship music and danced around my living room praising Jesus. I did whatever it took to make sure I was keeping my end of the bargain up with Jesus. His life for mine. Everyone will tell you that I was a good kid, but I had one huge weakness that I knew God hated. I was not good at controlling my thoughts. Since I had no belief in myself, and the Bible told me I was a weak, broken, perverted man, I ended up spending most of my childhood trying to not look at porn, a skill very difficult to master. No pun intended. It took so much energy to try to figure out how to control my dirty scumbag thoughts that I didn't have very much energy left for the rest of life. I was always angry at myself for my shortcomings, also not a pun, and didn't have any guidance to tell me that I was wasting all of my time and energy on trying to squash something as natural as a teenage boy interested in sex.
I have been a sinner.
Shame on you!
Wretched sinner unit.
Hi there, sinners.
I'm a sinner, okay?
Kids,
You're a sinner!
Man, I'm a sinner and God's a pervert.
But he loves the sinner.
I found out later that Mary was likely 14 years old when she had Jesus. Explain how Mary, the mother of Jesus, can be a mom at 14, but I can't look at a picture of a naked girl at the neighbor's garage sale. I was so determined to stop that I was sure God would help, but he didn't seem to like the ways I came up with for him to do something. He preferred to be more subtle in his help. Wouldn't want to make himself too obvious, you know. That would be, well,
Inconceivable.
it seemed like all of us Christian boys out there got the same message. The worst thing you could possibly do is think about a woman naked. And don't even think about whipping it out before you get married.
I made a pact with God to stay a virgin till I'm married.
I trusted God and my parents and didn't want to mess up my future marriage to the girl that was absolutely definitely out there saving herself for me. God had a plan for my life. I had no idea what it was, but I had to stick to his rules and trust that he had some sort of plan. I kept reinforcing my Christian beliefs through reading the Bible and Christian books, and eventually focused on the one part I could really connect with, the part about Jesus helping people.
Then wash my feet with your hair.
I always hoped that somebody would come through for me, be the answer to my prayers. So I wanted to be that for other people. I love to do nice things for folks and encourage them. I volunteered with the junior high youth group and spent time with all sorts of different people. I connected with that part of Jesus. I thought that's who Jesus was. Somehow millions of other Christians did not get that same message. I also found a lot of meaning supporting my closest and closeted Christian best friend, encouraging him somehow to not hate himself, which is hard when your sex life is one of the types all of the other Christians like to focus on. Sadly, he would never reach a place where he was able to love himself just as he was. To this day, he denies himself and chooses Christ, as he says.
God is good. God is good.
I love blessing people in general. I would even earn money to put it under my best friend's mom's doormat because his deadbeat father left them high and dry. Blessing others was really the only thing that made me happy, besides getting attention from girls. Since I didn't like myself, I really wanted somebody to love me just as I was. All through middle school and high school, I got super focused on the girl. Well, one in middle school and a different one in high school. But I flirted my ass off all the way through high school. When I magically got better looking right before high school started, I was pretty much a man whore as far as Christian boys go. Just flirting, of course, nothing unholy.
Thinking sexy thoughts, thinking sexy thoughts, thinking sexy thoughts.
When I graduated from high school, I went to the unholiest of unholy places for college, Capitol Hill in Seattle. It was very different from what I was used to. I slowly realized that the information I gleaned during my sheltered life seemed to not fit the reality that was out there. And the people I interacted with, the heathens, were actually super kind and loved me even though I said judgmental things at times and did some pretty offensive stuff in the name of God. And yet they saw how I was just reciting things I had been told and gave me the grace and love that I was always looking for. I had no sense of self. I could not love myself because I really didn't have any reason to. For a bit, I was happy because I temporarily dated my beautiful best friend, but then my mental health problems became pretty clear and she wisely moved on. I fully hated myself and couldn't find a way to get God to wake up and be that loving father I needed, which is literally what the Bible had promised me. This was a defining time in my life, but my faith was still my reality, and when questions would arise, I would just tweak it a bit and keep moving forward. Leaving my religion was not an option, as many out there still believe. But I guarantee you it is an option. But spending 2 years with great heathens on Capitol Hill would end up changing my life. I would just have to be failed by God and his people a lot more before I was forced to take a deep look into why my life wasn't getting any better. After getting dumped by the girl I was courting, purity culture, we'll have to talk about that another time. I took some time off from dating, but not much. I went on a horrible date with one random girl and then met my wife at a dinner party at the local Christian college. She was a Christian girl who loved the Lord, and I was attracted to her strong faith. My Christian music told me to look for the kind of girl you could meet behind the doors of the church. I still remember the rap. SEX is the test when unpressed, so back up off with less of that zest. Impress this brother with a life of virtue. The innocence that's spent is gonna hurt you. Safe is the way to say to play, then again safe ain't safe at all today. So just wait for the mates that's straight from God and don't give it up till you tie the knot. Having been left by my last girlfriend, I decided to tell this new girl about my struggles very quickly, trying to see if she would run away. I needed her to know that I was damaged goods, but she had been homeschooled until high school, raised in the church, and didn't really know anything about mental health. So she didn't really know what she was getting into. There must have been something endearing about me, though, because we got married a couple years later. At that time, I was unaware that some people thought doubting God was a sin.
I have the same doubts you do.
In my life, asking God for help and then wondering if he was doing anything was an everyday occurrence that I just lived with. I was still fully committed to my faith and lived it out, which is why it came as quite a shock to my wife when she found out that I had some doubts. Many times along the way, I was reminded of all the things that I had to do to upkeep my relationship with God, implying that it was my fault that I wasn't experiencing him. He was there, everyone told me. I just had to do something different or better. I was definitely the problem, though. It couldn't be God because God is perfect, reinforcing yet again the main theme I received from religion. God is good, and everything bad that was happening in my life was because of dirty, no-good humans, mainly me in this case.
Don't blame the boy.
Blame society. Blame God.
Blame the Catholic Church.
Think about that mentality. If you had to give somebody else credit for every good thing you did and take the blame for everything bad that happened in your life, how long could you last? I lasted more than 30 years, which is pretty impressive. It's hard to not feel like I wasted 30 years of my life, but I did a lot of good as a Christian, and I know many other Christians with great hearts that do a lot of good. That's not the problem. The problem that I see is this: who gets the credit and who gets the blame? And how does that affect your view of reality, your view of yourself, and your mental health? There are many, many kinds of Christians in my life. And I know one major argument for religion is that people need moral guidance.
You are not worthy to receive these 10 commandments.
But after getting to know super good atheists and some pretty horrible Christians, I don't think religion has much to do with morals anymore. The evangelical vote for president tells you all you need to know there.
Well, I mean, your witness is dead.
My new theory is that these good, kind Christians would be just as good without God, and maybe even quite a bit healthier. It still baffles me when amazing people that I love talk openly about how broken they are, how they're horrible people deserving of hell. How is that going to help you be a healthy human?
It's going to be hard.
That's what she said.
That's my joke. Damn it, Dwight.
So there I was, with a wife and a lifetime collection of biblical shame. We had saved ourselves for marriage, of course, so we were very eager to get hitched. Unfortunately, I had a full dose of purity culture and had so much shame from failing God over and over again that after we got married, my shame was definitely still there waiting for me. Go figure. Marriage was not going to be the answer to my problems. All I knew how to do was hide the shame, which doesn't feel great. I was depressed, angry at myself and the world, and couldn't figure out how to be happy and healthy. God chose not to help in any sort of tangible ways, and no matter how hard I tried to believe in it, I couldn't find the hope and peace that he promised. I was still under the impression that I was doing something wrong. And since I was told I couldn't find love, peace, and hope anywhere besides God, I was absolutely hopeless. I had no peace, and I didn't have enough love to give my wife as much as she deserved. I spent most of my marriage hating myself, and therefore couldn't love her the way she needed to be loved. I did my best and tried to manage my depression with meds and some counseling. I was very angry, very short-tempered, just like my father, and didn't know how to love myself. I had never been taught, nor was I given the impression, that I was worthy of love. My parents were broken, and God wasn't able to show me love in any ways that I could actually receive it. With this new awesome combo, I don't think I was even aware of what it meant to love somebody. I was unable to show much love to myself or my wife, so we did what most Christian couples do: ignore our problems and have kids.
Let's make a baby.
I was so scared to have kids and bring them into this world, but making babies early is kind of a must for young Christian couples. So whether I was ready or not, it was time to become a dad. I was not ready. We found out we were pregnant while my dad was in the hospital with spinal meningitis. The doctor said he wasn't going to live, so we told him about the pregnancy while he was in a coma in hopes that he would miraculously wake up.
It's a miracle! I performed a miracle! I'm a genius!
The doctors ended up saving his life. A few months later, I graduated from teaching school, and a few months after that, my dad got to meet his first grandbaby. I'd found a special education position in South Seattle when few others could find a full-time position. It seemed like life was coming together. It wasn't. I should have subbed. I was not ready. I was in for a very rude awakening. My first year of teaching brought many failures, more self-hatred, and even more anger. My dad had changed a bit after his death scare, and for the next couple of years, we hung out more often. He was able to be a support to me and keep me going with encouragement during my early teaching years. I'd help him with cameras and editing photos from his trips. I even worked at his travel agency during the summers so I could spend more time with him and mooch the occasional lunch or a quick chat about life. He was able to be more encouraging, and we were growing closer. Then, on February 23rd, 2013, he up and died. Christians have always liked to blame my deconstruction on this moment, telling me that I was mad at God for letting my father die. But I wasn't mad at God. My dad had publicly declared, if I can't have my ice cream sundaes, I don't want to live. He chose ice cream over his family, and that's just a reality that we have to live with. He didn't take care of himself, which is kind of stupid since he almost died 3 years earlier. He died of a heart attack while mowing the lawn. I later found out he was mowing the lawn while my mom napped. She needed a break from the hours-long rants my dad would go on about one specific religious sticking point. He wanted her to go to the same church as him. Seriously. He died while they took a break from having the same argument they had for decades. That was his priority. And where does a priority like that come from? A pastor. Our pastor had told him that my mom was causing division in the marriage by going to a different church. Thanks, dude. Add him to the pile of Christians who thought they were doing the right thing, but weren't educated enough to actually help. I have fallen victim to this many times in my life, so much so that it became a theme. As more of his life unfolded over the years following his death, I was forced to face a lot of painful truths about my dad, and also about myself, and specifically about our shared faith. I had gone to the same church for my entire life. It changed pastors and names a few times along the way, trying to reinvent itself after some public and painful failures, but it still had some of the same people I grew up with. My dad thought our longtime pastor was one of his best friends, but as I learned more, it became clear to me that he wasn't the healthiest of humans. At my dad's funeral, he tried to give me a pep talk about how bright my future could be, and in a comparison referred to my dad as a wart on a log.
I was just a lonely bump on a log.
Later, as I was battling hard to keep my faith, I would sit out in the lobby so I could listen without the anxiety. One day he walked by during worship and told me to get my butt in the chair next to my wife or he'd call me out from the front. I had to take my breaks in the bathroom after that. So he wasn't actually a good, healthy friend to my dad, nor was he a good, healthy pastor to us. And due to my dad's insecurities, which created a deep need in him to be a big fish in a small pond, he needed to be at that church, even though my mom wanted to go to a bigger, old-school church. So when his pastor told him that his wife was the one sinning by not going to the same church as him, you can bet he held on to that pretty tightly, like decades, literally until his dying day. Sadly, this biblical bullshit had a huge negative impact on my parents' marriage, and therefore our family. Our pastor unwittingly enabled my dad by encouraging his stubbornness and insecurity, simply because he put all of his trust in a 2,000-year-old book and didn't take the time to learn how to actually help hurting people with real, proven methods. He believed that the Bible contained all of the wisdom necessary to help people with their everyday lives, which I can now guarantee you is not the case. So he was unable to support my father and didn't encourage my dad to work on himself at all. Instead, he encouraged him to hold firm to this biblical marriage advice, and eventually ended up making my dad an elder in the church, as I mentioned before. If the Bible is your main source of truth, like our pastor, I would encourage you to consider that what the Bible teaches is sometimes not actually healthy. I hope you'll join me for further discussion about this in the comments after you like and subscribe.
And don't forget to smash that subscribe button!
My dad needed somebody to love him enough to encourage him to get real, psychological, mental health help, to focus on himself and stop trying to use the Bible to change other people. Sadly, his BFF pastor was completely incapable of this. Sadly, shortly after this, his denomination promoted him to be head of the entire Pacific Northwest, really helping me realize even more that my religion had its priorities severely misplaced. The Bible is not a mental health book and should never be viewed as such. Some of its advice is not psychologically sound and, plain and simple, actually causes more harm instead of helping. For my dad, it provided him a mandate that he used to try to control my mom and gloss over his own imperfections. Instead of realizing his own need for growth, he used the book to show my mom that she was the one who needed to change. This, along with his belief that he had been redeemed and made new again, gave him a false sense of being right and made it easy for him to focus on what my mom needed to change. For years after my dad's death, I wrestled with the painful reality that our pastor, my Christian friends, and the Bible didn't actually know much about what it takes to be a healthy human. The relationship that I had with Jesus was starting to look more like an abusive relationship.
It's abuse.
Yes, but
I was going to have to start looking elsewhere for useful information.
Knowledge and wisdom is the real power.
When I did research more about what I needed to do to become a happier and healthier person, the data told me to take care of myself, realize my own inherent self-worth, and focus on my good qualities rather than my brokenness. Exactly the opposite of what I had been taught in the church. So not long after our pastor showed me the true fruit of the Jesus tree, my wife and I decided to leave that church in hopes of finding a healthier shepherd. And we landed at a church with a pastor that I still love. He's a good man, skilled at listening and encouraging. Definitely more of what I needed. For a second, I was hopeful that I might be able to hold on to my faith. But the massive realization that my religion might be causing more problems than it fixes had already taken root, and a new church wasn't going to fix it. It was clear that God, his book, his pastors, and his people that surrounded me were lacking the skills and knowledge that it took to make real, authentic progress in life. Unfortunately, as I tried to be more and more authentic, I found myself very stuck. It's pretty clear that Christians didn't want me to be authentic because my thoughts made their lives very difficult. It all came to a head one day in church. As I was looking around, all I could think about was how phony we all were. And it pretty quickly turned into a massive panic attack, right there in the middle of the church. My wife was next to me, seeing the visible effects of my panic, but likely wasn't sure how to support me. She wanted me there, and I wanted to be there to support her, but I literally had nothing left to give. I was stuck in a community, a religion that preached love, peace, and hope, and yet we damned people that loved the same gender, started wars to prove that our God was the most loving,
Holy war! Holy war!
and told the world that hope could only be found by believing in our God and doubting your own intuition.
Say what?
Say what? We claimed ownership of all good things and blamed everyone else for the bad things, then shunned or shamed anybody who questioned us. And we sat there every Sunday morning pretending like everything was okay, like we had no doubts about the whole thing, and it was definitely, totally all logical. Christian community is not real, authentic community because Christians don't know how to be real and authentic.
Jerks, church jerks, church jerks.
That's going to piss somebody off. To me, in that moment, we were just a group of people getting together to reinforce a common set of beliefs, despite all of us having similar doubts and questions about those beliefs, because we were all too scared to consider what would happen if it all came crashing down. Our fears were well-founded, because as my religious world continued crashing down around me, it proved very difficult to survive. My attempts to hold on to my faith as long as I could came crashing to a halt that day in church, and I never went back, except to visit the pastor, because I like him. I decided to officially leave my faith in pursuit of real, healthy, authentic life, an authentic, healthy community. Unfortunately, it quickly became clear to me that the people of God were even less healthy than I had realized. I represented everything they were too scared to face, and to protect themselves, they either had to shut me out, fight back, or bombard me with God's love, which is anything but loving.
Well, hate the sin, love the sinner.
It was too difficult and scary to have the hard discussions with me, so most of them dropped me. Besides my mom, pretty much every Christian that had once professed to love me unconditionally suddenly had one very big condition. They were unable to show me the love and support I needed because the only love they had been taught required them to speak truth into my life. That was how my former best friend from high school put it. The one that I supported and loved through the shame he was gifted by Christians due to his sexuality.
Thanks for nothing!
The closest friends are the ones that can hurt you the most, especially if they believe their actions are God-ordained. He refused to stop telling me how much God loved me. He told me he couldn't stop because it was his duty. He could not respect my boundaries and continually asked me to reconsider as though he didn't know exactly how hard I had tried for decades. In our last conversation, I turned the discussion around and asked him if he would be willing to reconsider his current anti-vaxxer stance, to which he replied, "Oh, I've already considered everything." But according to his narrow-minded view, he somehow thought that I hadn't considered my stance. This is similar to when other Christians had asked me to give it a month or 6 months or give it a year and see what God will do in your life. That's just rude and absolutely ridiculous. If I asked a Christian to give up God for any amount of time, I would likely receive some very unkind messages.
Religious persecution!
Persecuted, persecuted,
It's religious persecution.
And now I was on the other side of that Christian hypocrisy. And it was very painful, especially from those that I was closest to. It was heartbreaking. I knew people wouldn't be happy about me leaving, but I never imagined how brutal Christians could be. These are the people of Jesus, and compared to the accepting and loving friends I had met in college, the contrast at that point was painfully obvious. Maybe I should thank my old best friend for making it obvious for me, since he knew exactly what I had been through and still couldn't see me and accept me as I was. He was completely blinded by his religion. God's love is conditional. My friend's love was conditional, and I no longer met the criteria. He didn't even know how to love someone like me. He had been taught to love people to Jesus, but had never been taught how to actually love people, and was apparently completely incapable. So after 30 years of holding on tight to my faith, I let it go. It was the most thought out and difficult decision of my life, and yet everyone around me treated me like I had made the most frivolous decision ever. When you leave the church, nobody wants you to be a successful atheist. It was right around the time that 80% of evangelicals voted for Donald Trump. which confirmed that the teachings of Jesus had gone wrong somewhere. The part of the religion that I had connected with most was loving and serving the least of these, and clearly Jesus' message hadn't had the same effect on most other Christians. They were more interested in power than humility, imposing their beliefs as opposed to following the teachings of Jesus. They had reverted to following the Old Testament angry God, and like the Israelites, who were tired of not having a king at one point, they decided that God had sent them one. Donald John Trump. Because of course. This forced me to reflect even further on religion as a whole. Not only had it proven false over and over again in my life, but it was now appearing as though it might actually be having a net negative effect on society. Sure, some teachings of Jesus could be helpful to humanity, although I quickly discovered that most of them were regurgitated ideas from other saviors and philosophers. The moral stuff was just common sense, but the majority of the teachings in the Bible had actually held me back from being happy and healthy. And now it was becoming pretty clear that it was doing the same thing to the world around me. It turns out the Bible wasn't what I thought it was. And if you haven't done much research into the history of the Bible and the church, you really should look into it. Like at the real historical sources. It is deeply troubling. You won't have to look far. It's now clear to me that it's just being wielded for power. And as if I needed any more evidence, this rich guy figured out how to use it to become president. I'm sad to say that if you're a Christian and aren't aware, you have been absolutely played by Donald Trump. Like a freaking fiddle.
The Bible certainly is one of, if not, I mean, it is the book.
Let's pray together, may we? Yes.
I believe in God. I am Christian.
I'm a Protestant. I'm very proud of it. Presbyterian, to be exact.
I'm Presbyterian. Boy, that's down the middle of the road, folks, in all fairness. I mean, Seventh-day Adventist, I don't know about.
I have great relationship with God. I have great relationship with the evangelicals. And I go to church a lot. Always on Christmas, always on Easter, always when there's a major occasion. And during the Sundays, I'm a Sunday church person. I like to do the right thing where I don't have to actually ask for forgiveness. When we go in church and when I drink my little wine, which is about the only wine I drink, and have my little cracker, I guess that's a form of asking for forgiveness. And I do that as often as possible because I feel cleansed. We were having fun when I said, I drink the wine, I eat the cracker. If I do something wrong, I think I just try and make it right. I don't bring God into that picture.
My wife and I pray for you.
Thank you. Well, I need it probably more than anybody in this room.
You can stay if you want it because you need the prayer more than I do, I think. I want to just pray for Arnold if we can for those ratings.
I can understand the evangelicals to a certain extent saying, well, maybe he's not as nice as we want him to be, but they also want to see the country be great.
Why do you think those voters are drawn to you?
Well, I'm Protestant, I'm Presbyterian, which means something. Maybe he's not as perfect on the Bible, but I did go to Sunday school for many years, I want to tell you. I get sent Bibles by a lot of people.
Where are all those Bibles anyhow now?
Well, actually, we keep them in a certain place, a very, very nice place.
My second favorite book of all time. What's my first favorite book? The Bible.
The Bible is special. The Bible, the more you see it, the more you read it, the more incredible it is.
An Old Testament guy or a New Testament guy?
Probably equal. Proverbs, the chapter, never bend to envy. I've had that thing all of my life where people are bending to envy.
2 Corinthians, right? 2 Corinthians 3:17. That's the whole ball game.
There's no way I would ever do anything to do negative to a Bible. God is the ultimate. I mean, God created this. And, here's the Pacific Ocean right behind us. So, nobody, no thing, there's nothing like God.
Anyways, as I researched more and more, I realized that my whole sense of self was based on dogma told to me from this book. As a kid, I had been constantly told by people that theoretically loved me that the Bible was a trustworthy source. How was I supposed to know they didn't proofread it or understand anything about it? Come to find out, most Christians don't know much about the Bible. Unfortunately, every person of influence in my life told me to trust the Bible, even though they likely hadn't done much or any research before teaching me such truths. Many Christians I know just grew up in the church. Some, like my father, used it to control things they couldn't control otherwise, and some, like my mother, bought into it because they had broken childhoods and craved any and all community. And of course, the Christian community is always looking for people who are thoroughly convinced they are depraved and helpless. As you can imagine, my new perspective made life very difficult for my Christian family, especially my wife. Understandably, she was unable to support me on my journey, but I was equally unable to support her faith. I was ready to move forward and grow in a different direction, but she was happy with how life was. And because I had thrown her world into turmoil, she decided to dig in even deeper. I wasn't doing so well. I was beat up, I had zero belief in my own abilities, and had decades of failures to my name to support my self-loathing. But I had to do something. I had no idea what, though. I decided I would just take the time and money I'd spent on God and spend it on figuring myself out. All I knew was that I had given God enough chances, and it would literally be insane to trust him anymore. But I had no idea what to do. So what did I do? Ketamine, of course. Quite the way to kick off my journey out of religion and towards self-awareness. The trips were definitely interesting, but unfortunately, they did not get me to my destination. Because of the meds I was on, it didn't have the long-lasting effects that I was hoping for, but it sure made for some interesting rides. It's very much like the same feeling of having a deep spiritual experience, only to realize a few short days later that nothing had actually changed. Meanwhile, my wife felt like I had abandoned her. She was understandably scared, angry, and hurt. She decided to take a stand for her beliefs and unfortunately fell prey to some deceitful people who convinced her that I was the enemy and that they had the truth. Friends and even family members took her side and pegged me as the problem, the destroyer of love and hope, without even considering that my decision to leave my faith was a reasonable, healthy, extremely difficult, and necessary one. They were blinded by their fear of what it meant for them. Thankfully, some of them have grown a lot and reached out since then, and for that, I'm very grateful. My wife decided she couldn't trust me, and instead listened to pastors, Christian podcasts, and even added some online prophets in her pursuit to bolster her faith. She started going to a different church that reinforced her more conservative beliefs. I was even more hurt and angry, and my unhealthy behaviors only pushed her further away. We were thoroughly miserable. The big difference was that she had her Christian community to affirm her stances, and I having no one. My mom helped there. I reached out to my mother at times to affirm my sanity, but she still held her same Christian beliefs and therefore couldn't really support any of my stances. Seemingly alone and dealing with a lot of pushback, I could not keep my life together. I was falling apart at work and couldn't hide all of my pain. It came to the point where my coworkers sat me down and told me they were concerned. I had no idea what to do. I had nothing left, no energy. The teachings had no positive effect on my life because they lacked knowledge of basic psychology and pushed God's love instead of authentic love. It didn't teach me how to love myself or take care of myself. It taught me that God loved me despite me being unlovable. I had a desire to be loved as I was.
I want to be seen as I am, warts and all.
I'm great with warts.
A need to be authentic and still accepted. And for me, that wasn't possible in the church. So with my life completely falling apart and having no idea what to do, I decided to put myself into mental health treatment. I looked at hospitals. They did not seem right for me. But it turns out that my crappy insurance actually had decent mental health coverage. I found a live-in treatment house in California, dropped everything, drove down there with my big brother. He was doing his best to support me behind the scenes, even though he was still a believer, and I'm tremendously grateful for him taking this time out of his life to support me in this way. We let ourselves have fun on the road trip, stopping in Weed, California, of course, for a night. Spent the second night at my friend Kate's house in Arroyo Grande, the same friend, actually, whose mom brought my depression to my parents' attention in high school. And then I spent a night in a hotel near the beach. The next day, I walked up to my new house, hugged my brother goodbye, and got to work. It was quite the experience. I'll have to tell you more about it another time. But my main takeaway was that I had an effed up childhood, including internalizing a lot of unhelpful messages from the Bible. The irony is that I learned the most from a rabbi who came to the house each week to teach us about CPTSD. Everything started to make sense. Between my unhealthy parents and my religious upbringing, I had a shitload of trauma. And despite the Bible telling me I was a new creation, the old is gone, the new has come, I realized that God did not, or could not, or would not help me, and that it was all up to me. So I put my head down, plowed forward, and told people to watch me. And I focused on proving to myself that I could do hard things by taking one small step at a time. It literally didn't matter how small. I actually even wrote a book during that time as part of my reflection. You can find it in the comments. Unfortunately, when I got back, the Christians in my life still saw me as the enemy and were about to unleash their full barrage of Christian love. That story, and many other things I've discovered on my journey towards mental health and away from religion, will make up the content of this channel. I'll share what I've learned in my thousands of hours of research, discussions, and counseling sessions. I'll ask for your thoughts and even be willing to change my mind when new, better information comes along. Shocking, right? I humbly ask you to join me on this journey by liking this video and subscribing to my channel. I am an open book, so please feel free to reach out. I would love to learn about your personal story and hear your thoughts on the subject. Thank you for your time, and I hope to connect with you soon. All the best.